We were renovating my father's house and found a secret room. To say my father, Dennis Hargrove, was different would be like saying getting pepper sprayed was mildly unpleasant. It communicates the idea, but not nearly to the extreme that it's true. Dad was so wildly eccentric, no woman could ever put up with him. Mom left him when I was 4. Never saw her again. And I'm pretty sure that's as long as any woman ever stayed with him. Years of a successful medical practice meant Dad had a lot of money and even more land, and he wasn't a bad-looking dude, so getting women was a walk in the park. Getting them to stick around was a nightmare. Mary, the woman he was with until he died, stayed with him until the end, but I could see she hated him. She never came in the same room as him without a scowl on her face. When he finally passed after a long, arduous fight with heart disease, she vanished. She was no spring chicken herself. I had offered for her to stay in the house as long as she needed. My wife and I weren't moving in, and the only response we ever received was, "I'll not be in this house one damn second after that old bastard passes." Now that Dad's gone and the place is vacant, my wife, Jenny, and I decided to gut the old place and fix it up. It'll make a nice rental property. She and I never had any kids, so we don't need a place this big. Plus, we have no real desire to leave the city. It's a nice old home, but it was very dated. Shag carpet, spiral staircase, wood panels on the walls. It's like a Sears catalog from the 70s vomited into this place. For all of Dad's money and his constant attempts to keep up with the Joneses my whole life, he never would do anything to house that involved any real work. All new appliances and furniture, but couldn't bring himself to get rid of the hideous green plastic tiles that lined the shower walls. Our renovation began in the living room, working our way through the kitchen, the bathroom, and the master bedroom, when Jenny noticed something weird. "Honey, have you ever noticed this wall is in farther than the wall in the bathroom? That's an exterior wall, shouldn't they be in the same place?" "No," I replied. "I never noticed. That's how it's always been." "Think the water heater is in there or something?" "No, the water heater is in that alcove next to the washer and dryer." We stood and contemplated for a minute. We weren't going to bust down the drywall on that wall. Every other wall had that stupid wood paneling but this one. But I looked at Jenny and said, "What the hell?" and swung my hammer through the drywall. It gave way with no effort, so much so I almost fell through it when my hammer didn't meet any resistance. I knocked a few more holes in the wall and stuck my head and a flashlight through the hole. "Hey, there's a staircase in here." "No way. Where does it go? I didn't know this place had a basement." "It doesn't," I replied. "At least I don't think it does." So, we knocked the rest of the drywall out until we had a hole big enough we could both fit through. We grabbed our flashlights and headed down the staircase. "What do you think is down here, baby? Think this is where your dad stored all his gold bars? Huge wads of cash? Vintage porn collection?" Jenny said, coughing. The dust was getting stirred as we made our descent. Jenny coughed and itched as we went down. Poor girl was allergic to everything. She'd always joke about how I was never sick, and she always was. "Ha ha. I'm not sure, dear. I've never known this was here. I'm sure he had it sectioned off for a good reason." At the bottom of the steps was a large steel door with a padlock on it. Dad had the same lock on his chest of war relics he had in the attic, so I tried the key and we walked into the basement that never was. It was pitch black. We shined our lights around to find a light switch, but found several candles. I used my cigarette lighter to light a few to give us enough light to see. The basement was an open floor, with tapestries and wheeled bookshelves everywhere. Tucked in one corner were several boy-sized wooden mannequins. "Tim, what is all of this stuff?" "I'm not sure. Looks like an old collection of books on world religions, mysticism, the occult, alchemy, you name it." "What was your dad doing with all of this? I thought he was Catholic." "He is, or was. I'm not really sure. Most of these books look like they haven't been touched in years. Actually, I don't think anything down here has." "Hey, look. There's a desk over here in the corner. Looks like your dad's handwriting on some of these pages." I approached the desk and fumbled around the papers. Most of them were letters from men with names I couldn't pronounce, most likely from other countries. They all dealt with Eastern mysticism, resurrection of the dead, every terrible thing you can imagine. "Tim," Jenny asked, "was your dad practicing some kind of black magic?" "I'm not sure." I thumbed through more of the papers. "Hey, here's a letter from Mom, dated 1976. "You were what, 5 then?" "Yeah, that's about a year after she left." "Well, what does it say?" I glossed over the letter as quickly as I could. She's telling Dad she still loves him, but she'll never forgive him for what he's done. For creating some kind of monster. "What monster?" "Tim, I really think your dad was into some serious shit here if your mom left him for it." "I know, and I'm not sure. Dad was always pretty normal. I have no idea what she's talking about. We scoured the papers and the documents Dad had sitting around. I inspected the mannequins. They were all covered with runes and glyphs, no doubt related to some of the black magic Dad was studying. Jenny sat in the corner combing through papers while I continued to snoop around. Tim, I think I have something. What's that? In all your dad's letters, he seems like he's trying to knock on a very particular door. Here's one your dad translated where some Eastern mystic talks about rescuing a soul from the afterlife, bringing it back to this dimension. Then this man from Cambodia is telling him how to bind souls to mannequins, see? And all these symbols he's put at the bottom. Match the ones on the mannequins. What else is in the letters? Well, there's one here from a chemist at Caltech, dated August 1975. There are some pretty complex chemical formulas here, and apparently some magic too. What does it make? Some kind of synthetic skin, rather real skin, that can grow and bleed without any organs. The chemist calls it the perfect disguise for someone who doesn't belong here. I don't understand. So Dad wanted to make some kind of living dead doll with skin? Given how your mother reacted, it looks like he was successful. There are even letters here from some of the people he consulted congratulating him. I thumbed through more random papers around the basement. Jenny did likewise, thumbing around through letters and envelopes Dad had strung across that corner of the room. I continued to look when I noticed Jenny had stopped moving, sitting in the corner, her eyes fixed on a single document. Tim, she said as she began sobbing uncontrollably. Tim, I know who... She couldn't speak past the sobbing. I approached her. What's wrong? I asked. She tried to hold back the tears as she handed me the paper. I picked it up, and my heart sank when I realized what it was. Certificate of death for Timothy Wayne Hargrove, December 8, 1974. Cause of death, brain trauma. My wife started to film herself eating. I swear, it all started out innocently enough. My wife, Carol, and I had fallen on hard times due to the pandemic. She'd gotten laid off from her position, and my hours have been cut due to our clients tightening up their purses the last couple of years. We had a toddler, Marcia, and a cat to feed, as well as ourselves. It was eating up our savings. We didn't want to be out of home. We were terrified. One night, while we were sitting at home, she had, at least I thought, jokingly talked about creating an OnlyFans. We toyed with the idea a bit, and eventually her face got more serious and she started talking numbers. I loved Carol. I trusted her. And honestly, we could use the money. We talked for a while longer about it, what our boundaries were on. We agreed that it wouldn't be anything outright lewd or erotic, and she suggested the idea of eating in front of a camera. Apparently it's a thing. Whatever, I guess. I agreed. It seemed harmless enough. It started out harmless. We set up a camera in our spare office, facing the desk. Every other night she would order takeout and eat in there while filming. She would post it wherever online. Things carried on normally like this for a couple of months. She'd order her own food, stuff herself in another room while we ate at the dining table. I'll admit, the money was good. Good enough that it actually surpassed what she would have been making working a normal job. Carol bumped up to filming once a day. One day at lunch and the other day at dinner. Of course she gained some weight, but hell, I'm no prime example of vigorous health. As the weeks went on, she spent more and more time filming these eating videos. We paid off the remainders on our auto loan. We put down a good chunk on our mortgage. We were able to start a college fund for Marcia. Our savings account was looking healthier than ever. Her health, however, wasn't looking too hot. She'd begun to lose breath quicker than usual. Eventually, she stopped coming on our family walks in the park. It wasn't a big deal. Just a couple times a week we would go to stretch our legs. After a while, she said she would prefer to stay home for the time being. At this point, I started to get a bit more concerned. No amount of money is worth throwing away your health, even if our insurance would cover whatever came up. I remember talking to her about it, that maybe she should slow down with her project and maybe even cut it off entirely. She was furious with me. She cried. She asked me if I still loved her. Of course I told her I do. I did. She was the love of my life. She'd given us our beautiful daughter. I caved in and just pleaded with her to be careful. As a few more months passed, we saw her less and less. She moved a television into the office. She got a larger, more comfortable chair to sit in. She'd gained so much weight in half a year, I did not think it was possible, and I knew sure as hell that it wasn't healthy. She was having trouble standing without aid, and it seemed like she almost wouldn't fit through the door to the office, if she tried. I confronted Carol once more about it, and I swear I have never seen my wife get so furious. She was red in the face as she waved her hand around the house. Keep your goddamn nose out of my business. This entire house and you are being paid for by my work. If you don't support me here, then I will find someone who does. Our daughter had peeked in and began crying. It was horrible to see her like that. I couldn't argue with her. She did support us at this point. I began to take her meals into her, at her demand. She would take the food and glare at me until I left the room again. Any further attempts I made at making her see sense was met with threats of divorce, of taking the kids, of destroying my life. I guess I justified myself in being part of this. At least the rest of us were comfortable. Money was not an issue to us anymore, and that particular nightmare is not one I ever want to revisit. I used to think financial troubles were the worst kind of nightmare I'd ever face, and honestly, they're still up there. A year passed, her mood got worse and worse, and Carol got more and more obsessed with her followers. I never thought that I would describe my wife as looking monstrous, but it almost seemed as if her limbs had begun to shrink. Her arms and legs looked like spindly, useless attachments to her mass. Her neck had fattened to the point that it looked like her head was attached directly to her massive torso. Her mouth seemed much wider than before, and she was almost always sweating. She began to scream at me for more food, always more. She would sob if she did not get it. I had to. I didn't want her to suffer. I never wanted her to suffer. Our cat disappeared 1 month ago. It happened on a night when I had taken Marcia out to the playground. Carol had texted me, "I am hungry. Bring me something now." I texted back that we were at the park. We wouldn't be back for another half hour or so. I am starving. We got back with a couple large pizzas for her. Our cat is a bit shy, so I didn't notice until much later in the day he was gone. God, I just assumed we'd left a window open or something. I swore I was crazy. Carol's limbs actually looked like they were getting shorter, retreating within her. She did not look like my wife. Maybe it was not my wife. The next week I was looking through our accounts for the first time in a while. Her deposits had stopped a month ago. She didn't listen to anything I say. I told her she needed to see a doctor. She could not stand up. I began to cut back on how much food I would bring in to her, but it didn't seem to halt her growth, which was noticeable on the daily now. All it did was enrage her. She would get red, her face contorted into a snarl, spittle flying from her wide mouth. She would point a shriveled, atrophied arm and scream curses, her eyes beady and full of fury, recessed into her massive head. Her hair had begun to fall out. I was so fucking terrified. I could not go in and feed her that last day. I could hear her screaming. Then she called for our daughter. Marcia went in. Marcia did not come out. I got worried. I opened the door. I saw Marcia's foot laying at the base of the monster that used to be my wife. She ate my daughter. Oh God, she ate my daughter. When I saw it, I couldn't move for what felt like hours, but I know it wasn't. The monster saw my look of horror. I don't know what happened. I saw the monster move for the first time since it consumed my wife I don't know how many months ago. It heaved itself off its perch. It almost seemed to slither, drag itself over towards the door. It couldn't fit through the door frame. It pressed hard against it. Oh my God, I couldn't move. The door frame of the office began to creak horribly and bulge outwards before I came to. I ran. I got in the car. I drove. I'm out now. Oh my God. My daughter, what happened to my wife? What have I done? Why I never answer when someone calls my name while I'm hunting. All these stories about the wilderness made me remember a story my cousin told me. Hunting is a huge part of the culture in Hawaii, and kids often learn from a very young age how to hunt. My cousin, who is in his late 20s now and has been hunting for a good 20 years of his life, has had some strange experiences in the wilderness, but this one always stuck with me as the weirdest one. Have you ever heard of a calling spirit? I'm sure they exist outside of Hawaii, but the gist is, if you're somewhere like the woods, or you're alone somewhere, if you hear someone call your name, you do not answer. Bad things happen when you answer. I'm going to write the story like how he told it to me. I was around 8 years old when this happened, when I had just started going hunting. Me, my cousins, and my uncle went hunting one evening in Wailua. By the time we were done, we were about a mile away from our truck. It was about 9 p.m. and it was dark. My uncle said, "I'm going to go get the truck, you kids wait here." But my cousins wanted to go with my uncle. I said, "I'll wait right here. You come get me, I'm not walking." I was overwalking. My uncle was like, "You sure you want to wait alone?" I said, "Hell no. I'm not walking. I'll wait." So he said he would be back in half an hour with the truck. Not too long after they left, I heard something moving in the bushes. Then I heard my uncle's voice. "Hey, Kai, come on, let's go." I said, "Hell no, I'm not walking back." And then my uncle whistled. You know when you're out playing with the other kids in the neighborhood and your dad whistles for you to come inside, and you know when you hear that whistle, you better go fast. That's the kind of whistle it was. So I jumped up and started walking. My uncle was walking ahead of me. I couldn't see him in the bushes, but I could hear him because he's saying things like, "You don't want to listen, you're gonna get in trouble." Then he said, "Come on, let's go down here." He wanted to go into the bushes, off the path. I knew something was wrong. I said, "But I thought we were going back to the truck." Just then, I saw headlights, back in the direction we started. And then I heard my uncle's stereo blasting, the only song he ever plays when he goes hunting. I start running. I take off, and something grabs my backpack. I fly my arms back and I let whatever it was take my bag. I get to the truck and my uncle asks, "Where's your stuff?" I point back to where I was and say, "I was following you." My uncle turns pale and yells, "Get in the car now!" I'm bawling. I'm scared. I know I messed up. I know you never answer when someone calls, but it sounded just like my uncle. He immediately took me to my other uncle who blessed me. Till this day when I go hunting, I never answer when anyone calls my name.